When the speaker is blaming and the listener is judging, you don't have communication, you have attack.
I'm so glad you joined us today. That makes you a part of CSLDallas, and we love that our community continues to grow. And we also love to give great spiritual content. And a way that you can participate in our community is financially give to it. It's easy to do so. Go to CSLDallas.org and hit the give button. Or you can set up a text giving mechanism at 972-954-4404, a safe and secure way to send us money whenever you watch a great message like this. So thanks for giving, and buckle up, because here comes the spiritual content.
Today, one of the things that is cornerstone and key to building a spiritually deepening relationship is the way in which we communicate. To say what we mean and to mean what we say, and to be willing to show up in this way is really priceless. It's priceless not only for our relationship, but it's priceless for our own growth, for our own willingness to speak and our willingness to be spoken to, and to have that deepening where we are actually changed. We're changed by each other. And if we allow it, it will always be for the better. And so we're going to explore that a little bit. I want to start out by reading this section from our beautiful book, Creating a Spiritual Relationship. Paul Ferrini says this: "The goal of communication is not to improve or to fix anyone." Especially not the other person. "The goal of communication is not to improve or fix anyone. It is simply to tell the truth and to hear the truth. Once you have spoken honestly and your partner has heard what you have to say, and vice versa, there will be greater understanding between you. Understanding helps to restore trust and connection. It is a step toward peace." He goes on to say, "Heartfelt communication requires honesty on the part of the speaker and acceptance on the part of the listener. When the speaker is blaming and the listener is judging, you don't have communication, you have attack." When the speaker is blaming and the listener is judging, you don't have communication, you have attack. So deep, heartfelt communication actually does require both partners to be willing, to be trying, to be seeking this kind of communication. This kind of communication does not work one-sidedly. If we're in a toxic relationship, if we're with an abusive partner, if we're with someone who is unwilling to do this kind of work, it can be very, very challenging. And we can still do our part and our work. So he outlines 3 things. To communicate effectively, you must do the following. 1, listen to your thoughts and feelings until you know what they are and understand that they belong only to you. Your thoughts and feelings. 2, honestly express how you think and feel to others without blaming them or trying to make them responsible for what you are thinking or feeling. And finally, listen without judging to any thoughts and feelings others want to convey to you. Remember, what they say, think, and feel describes their state of consciousness. It may or may not have anything to do with your own. So we're going to explore these 3 ideas. We're going to start out with some simple facts about communication. The first is that 7% of communication is actually the words we speak. And those words are critical, what we choose to say. The other 93% of communication is not the words we speak. 38% of communication is the tone of voice that we use when we are communicating. And studies have shown that so many people's tone of voice, obviously learned from childhood, is masked contempt or scorn. And you bet your partner can feel it. And so the tone of voice is extraordinarily important. And then all the other nonverbal cues, right? All the other body languages, whether or not you're on the phone, whether you're looking at the person, turning away, closed, open, all the ways in which, or just even energetically that we're showing up, because we know how sensitive and empathic spiritual people can be. And so all of that is going on as well. So the first thing to know about communication is that the words are only 7%, and everything else is a part of the process. So when we say communicate, It really is communicate with all of these things in alignment, word, tone, and nonverbal. To have all of them be in alignment actually is the beginning of healthy and respectful communication. The second thing to realize about communication is that we are, in fact, each living in our own little worlds. It is actually true that that's what's going on. And so when I communicate, I form a thought, and it actually goes through a filter system. It's the filter system of my thoughts and beliefs and feelings and attitudes and past relationships and all of that. That idea is actually filtering out through that, which is, of course, what's impacting my thoughts, my words, my tone, and my nonverbal communication. Well, and then that goes across the ethers to you over there, and you're listening through your filters, your attitudes, your past, your experience, and then that lodges in your brain, and you have to think, now, what did they mean? Or, oh, I know what they mean. They mean this. But do you see, from what was said to what was received, there's these two sets of filter systems, and the more unclear those filter systems are, the more they impact sending and receiving, which is, of course, why the reflective listening, the feedback loop, is so important. When Karen and I first started to work together, and then as we got into a relationship together, it was really amazing. She would constantly ask me, "What do you mean by that?" Because she and I have very different speaking patterns. And it really helped her to understand because, I'm a Yankee. And I'm sorry to all the Southerners. I'm a Yankee. I'm abrupt. I'm brisk. I'm short. I'm to the point. Come on, let's move on, because I'm like moving. And, I grew up with that. And to a Southern girl, that is very different. And she would be like, "What do you mean by that?" And oh, now I understand what you mean. The biggest thing that was really weird for us is I would say, "I have no opinion about that." And she would hear me say, "I have no opinion about that." And I don't know what she heard, but that's actually wasn't what she heard. She heard, "I don't care. I'm not willing to tell you what I think. I'm not sure what all else was behind that." And she had to ask me for a number of months, "What do you mean by that?" I have no opinion about that. That's what I mean. Really? Are you sure you're not just withholding something? No, I have no opinion about that. Now, I have taught myself, for 25 years, I've taught myself how not to have an opinion about everything, because let me tell you, I could have an opinion about everything. Right? Because really, actually, I do know how it all should be done. Right? And I clearly know how you should be doing it. And that has not served me well. So I am certain that when I first started saying I don't have an opinion about that was more of an aspiration than a truth. Then it became an affirmation, and now it actually is the truth. I have practiced not having an opinion about all kinds of things, because actually I don't need to. I don't actually need to have an opinion. But that was a really different way of speaking for Karen, and she was like, "What are you doing over there? I don't really get it." So we have to clarify our filters and our listening, and learn what these filter processes are. And then finally, I thought there was a third piece to this setting up of the conversation, but maybe those are the two, right? So there is, I've forgotten the first point already. There's all this nonverbal communication, and then there's all of this process in the communication process of all these filter systems. And of course, this is straight what we teach in Science of Mind. What's in those filter systems but our beliefs and habits and ways of seeing and perceiving the world that are moving through it. Oh, you know what? There is a slide missing. I knew there was. Okay. Nope. So the third thing is that impacts our communication is, of course, the way our parents communicated. And this shows up not only in just straightforward communication, but it shows up then when we have to communicate in conflict. when we're upset, angry, or, there's something, we just have a disagreement. So either our childhood looked like this, our parents yelling at each other, or our childhood looked like this, with withdrawal. People, we don't really get a lot of, training in how to handle conflict and how to communicate our way through conflict. And so one of two things happens. We either run the other direction and we do exactly the opposite of what our parents did, or we do exactly the same thing that they did. But in both cases, do you see, we're not actually being conscious about how we're communicating in conflict. We're simply being in reaction to it. And so we go to war. Instead of talking, we go to war. And so communication becomes the way in which we learn about each other, we connect, and we actually begin to work through the inevitable conflicts that are going to happen. Because what is a conflict? But simply that you and I see things differently. We have a different idea about it. Based on really whatever, it doesn't really matter what it's based on. It doesn't matter whether it's based on truth or false opinion. It doesn't matter whether it's based on our past or a book we read. Conflict is really fundamentally simply starts with we simply see things differently. Or we think we see things differently. And we have to actually begin to understand each other. So communication opens that process. Now, the first thing about healthy and respectful communication is that it's really hard to do when you're really upset. When you're triggered or angry, it's really hard to do. So probably not the best time to try the practice. Probably that's a good time to just close the conversation and take a little break. It's always really good. Healthy, respectful communication usually works best when there's not a lot of emotion running. Now, if you are able to pull yourself into a place of centeredness in the middle of that, great. And if both of you are able to do it, great. But sometimes a little quiet, a little distance, let's not make it worse, shall we? Let's just take a moment. Right? So that's the first piece of it. But when we're ready to communicate, there's some really powerful things that we can know about it and wonderful practices that come right out of the marriage of psychology and spirituality that can really help. So the first thing is about listening. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. Reply, refute, rebut, those kinds of things. And so seeking to listen to understand is the first place we go. We seek to do that. And that's challenging to do when we're in the throes of being upset. And so it's really good to have the practice of going back later and saying, help me understand what you were saying. Sometimes that is actually really challenging to do in the middle of the moment. But if we are openly communicating, we can go back, okay, so help me understand. This is what I heard you say. This is what I thought you meant. Can you help me understand? And to listen for that understanding. What's really important to recognize is that when we listen for understanding, that does not imply agreement. We can absolutely understand another person's point of view and disagree. But let's make sure we're actually disagreeing with what they mean, not what they think, not what we think they mean, right? And so understanding comes before that, to listen to understand. And as I said, sometimes it's really important to let the emotions that have risen, to let them cool down so that there's an opening, there's a listening that's available. So the question is not just what we are listening for, but what are we listening from? What is our space from which we're listening? And that's one of the reasons why I love this song so much, and it's so beautiful, because this is the moment where Galinda and say that again. Alphaba. This is the moment when they split and they go different directions, right? And to be able to, in the moment of communication, to actually listen from love, listen from there's something good here. There's a reason why we're in relationship. We're a part of the same whole. There's something, right? Do you see? It's not just what we're listening for what the other person is doing and let me try to understand what you're saying. But even more important is what's the space we're listening from? Are we listening from the assumption of love, the assumption of oneness, or are we listening from separation? You're over there and I don't know what you're doing, but I better protect myself from you. Or I'm going to make you do it differently because whatever you're doing is scary to me or impacting me in some way. Do you see? So the listening is very much about the other person and understanding them. But the ground is, what are we listening from? And Karen has been the biggest teacher of this for me, is to remember over and over and over again to listen from the idea that she's on my side. To listen from the idea that we love each other. To listen from the idea that we're one and not separate. Do you see? And that becomes this deep and powerful spiritual practice, because what's happening? All my false beliefs about separation, all my false beliefs about, I wasn't supported as a child and therefore you don't support me, are all now, they're all being questioned. Having to really look at them. And is that really true? Is it really, really true? Do I really want to keep living my life that way? So when we look for where we're listening from, we begin to become aware of our own thoughts and feelings, which is, of course, where Paul Ferrini tells us, and our spirituality tells us. We have to take responsibility for our thoughts and feelings and what's going on with us. So some short but very powerful tools. First, we want to let go of the words never and always. You're never on time. You're always blaming me. You're never doing it right. You're always doing this. You're never doing that, right? Have you ever done anything always? I don't even always brush my teeth, right? And so to say never and always, we're doing one of two things. We're either globalizing the idea or we're catastrophizing it. And they are clues. Never and always are clues, not to the other person, but actually to ourselves. They are clues to the way in which we have a tendency to globalize or catastrophize things, right? Globalize means that we think it's happening all the time everywhere. And so basically what we're doing is we're fixated on the black spot instead of seeing the big whiteboard. Or we're catastrophizing. Well, it's always, never works out. So it always goes wrong. And so we're believing in the worst possible thing. And it usually escalates. And so when we're listening to ourselves and hearing never and always, it's actually a clue to what's going on inside us. And where we might be reacting from. So this shows us the habits of thinking and responses to life. And it teaches us to take responsibility for our own thoughts and feelings. Our communication begins here. I know that in psychology it often talks about that communication begins in listening, but we can't actually listen until we know what's going on with us, what our thoughts and feelings are. So what's arising in us. And so the clue of never and always teaches us a great deal about our own thoughts and feelings. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is the ladder of inference. This comes out of David Boehm's dialogue work and psychology. The ladder of inference is what we do because of the way that we're designed. So what we do is we start with observable behavior. Now, I don't know if you know this, but there are 6 billion bits of information coming into your system right now. Right now, in this very moment, 6 billion bits of information. And if we tried to process or pay attention to that, we would become comatose, because we can't possibly engage with all of that information. So we begin to select the data. Hopefully you're selecting the data of listening to me and and looking at what's on the screen. But you could set like the data of whatever you're thinking about. You could select the data of, it's cold in here, it's hot in here. You could be selecting the data of all kinds of other things. But what happens is, of the vast array of observable behavior, we start selecting data out of it. And out of that data that we've selected, we make assumptions. I think she knows what she's talking about. I don't really know that she knows what she's talking about. I've seen her not do this. What does she get up doing up there, standing up there talking about this? Whatever, right? We have our assumptions, and so we draw conclusions. Yes, she knows what she's talking about. No, she doesn't know what she's talking about, which form a belief, and then that belief becomes an action. And that action is sometimes then what we say or what we do, or it informs the data we select. Do you see? And it becomes a loop. So if I'm constantly assuming that Karen is not on my side, I'm going to select the data that supports that. Out of all the observable behavior, that's the data I'm going to select because it supports the assumptions that I have. I get to draw the same conclusion. It reinforces my belief, which then reinforces my way of selecting that, of it taking in all of the observable data. And so really becoming aware of this ladder of inference, really, do you see ultimately what's the key there before action is beliefs. And this is precisely what we teach in New Thought in the Science of Mind, is that we have to become aware of the beliefs that are running us and how they become that filter system. The filter system of receiving and the filter system through which we speak. All of those assumptions and conclusions that we're drawing. So this ladder of inference begins to open for us our assumptions and projections. And the really annoying news about all of this is that we have to take responsibility for that. Because there are assumptions and projections. They're actually they really don't have anything to do with the other person at all. Because we haven't actually checked out if that's what the other person is actually doing or feeling or thinking or whatever. We've taken whatever communication has come, whatever action has come, and we've run up the ladder of inference, without actually engaging in conversation, basically without asking any questions, or without checking what are our thoughts and feelings, what's going on with us, so that we can then speak out of that. So to help with all of this, as we own our thoughts and feelings and we own our assumptions and projections, we do actually get to speak. Because there are things that we have to share or that we get to say. There are important things that we want to be able to talk about, that something is going on that's upsetting to me, that's not okay with me, and we actually get to ask for what we want. So this learning about my own assumptions and projections, learning about my thoughts and feelings, doesn't mean I'm stuck in this and it's all about me. There are actually two of us. And so this is a shorthand. This is a beautiful shorthand. It's actually a shorthand version of the nonviolent communication process. And it's a great way to begin to clear out some of these things that get in the way of a communication. So the first thing is to identify how I feel. I feel upset. I feel angry. I feel unfair. I feel disappointed. I feel happy. I feel, right? To actually do the work to be able to identify I'm feeling something, and instead of just blasting you or projecting it or assuming or whatever, to acknowledge I feel hurt. I feel unheard. I feel whatever. Now here's where the tricky part is. Remember our ladder of inference. Not selected data, but observable data. Now, how do we know it's the difference between selected data and observable data? Is that observable data has no emotional content. I'm going to say that again. Observable data has no emotional content to it. Do you see, the minute we use emotionally laden words, we are already into our assumptions and projections. We're deciding what your motivation is. We're thinking that we know how you're motivated. Well, you're angry with me. I feel hurt because you're angry with me. That's not observable behavior. Or you speak angrily to me is also not observable behavior. Right? And so when we get to this part, oopsie, I'm going backwards. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. When we get to this part, this This is one of the most profound spiritual practices I have ever tried to practice. Notice, tried to practice, not pretending that I'm a master at this in any way, shape, or form. When you, and what follows there is purely observable behavior, observable data. When you speak in a way that seems loud, and I feel confronted by it. When you withdraw, and when you stop talking to me and you turn away. Do you see? Not when you don't care enough to continue the conversation. Do you see how different that is? Well, you don't care enough to continue, so whatever. It's very different than when you stop talking to me and go away. Because that's observable behavior. You did actually move away. You stopped talking and you went into the other room. Do you see? Does that make sense to you? Right? I cannot stress this point enough. Because it is in the struggle to really, really speak about observable behavior that all of our assumptions and projections and feelings and thoughts and habits reveal themselves. Because those are all the things that we've decided is going on. And the data that we're selecting and the assumptions that we're making about it. And if we can really struggle to do that in that moment, then we can say, so what I want you to stay in the room so we can finish talking. Or can you please let me know that you're going away, that you need cool down time? Can you tell me when you might come back? What I need is to know that we're going to finish this conversation somewhere along the line. Do you see? I'm asking for what I need and want. Not, well, you just always go away and we never get to finishing anything. And so obviously you don't love me. I know that doesn't sound familiar to anybody in the room. Right? And, pardon me? And so, but practicing this shorthand, or this little set of phrases, and again, this is very challenging to do when we're in the middle of it. And it's okay. We know we have compassion for ourselves and we have compassion for the other person, and surely we're spiritually elastic enough to let us get upset and, be sloppy and be a little angry with each other and not hit below the belt. Right? Even in our upset, we have to be responsible for when we're hitting below the belt. But then to come back to it and to practice these ways of communicating, to speak about my feelings and my thoughts, to be very clear that I'm trying not to assume intent or motivation on your part. I'm trying not to project onto you, but to really say this specific, these words, this action, this tone of voice, very observable behavior, right? Without saying what that behavior means, and then asking for what I want. Do you see, not only does this enhance our relationship, but doing this is spiritual practice. This is actually a type of spiritual practice because it's causing us to be aware and to grow and to speak and to learn. And of course, the other person, they can say yes or no. And they can, hopefully you can negotiate to an agreement. And then they can say, yeah, let's try that. Let's try something new. So we take responsibility for our words and for our power to create. When we do this kind of thing, we are in fact taking responsibility for our words and our communication and our power to create. Because fundamentally, do you see, while in communication, only 7% of our communication is the words that we speak, they do actually lead. The words lead. They form an image, an idea, and all of the tone and the nonverbal communication that comes with it fill that out with feeling and flavor. And in the science of mind, we take very, very, very seriously the power of our word. Very seriously. And so if we're sloppy with our words and our communication and our interpersonal communications, if we're willing to say things sarcastically or just to get an effect or just unconsciously, do you see that we're undermining for ourselves our own belief in the power of our own word? Because we know that we say things we don't mean. Or we say things in the heat of something which when we come back to it, we actually would never have said or written in an email or put on a Facebook post. Right? And so we take really, really seriously the value and the importance of the congruence of what we're saying, our word, our tone, and our nonverbal behavior. Because do you see, when we're doing our spiritual work, our affirmations and our prayer work, our words and our inner tone and our inner nonverbal conviction and acceptance of that has to be in alignment. So when we're practicing that in relationship, not only does our relationship become enhanced, but we're deepening our congruence and we're deepening our own conviction that our word actually means something. And it means congruently what we mean to say. Because otherwise, when we do in our spiritual mind treatment, well, I'm abundant, I'm part of the universe, and I'm abundant, it's like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. Right? Because our words, we haven't learned to believe in our own words. We haven't learned to trust in our own words because we're not as careful with them as we could be. And we use them to blame, to judge, to attack, to defend, to push things out here so that we don't have to feel the feelings or take responsibility for the thoughts. So fundamentally, the spiritual nature of our relationships is so deepened, and our own spirituality is so deepened when our relationship is a place where we practice the power of the word. Ernest Holmes says this: the starting point of all creation is the word of spirit. The word is the concept, the idea, image, or thought of God. The word back of everything is its initial cause. The word of God means the power of spirit to declare itself into manifestation, into form. This is the word. He goes on to say, so everyone's word, partaking of this original nature as it does, must reproduce the creative function in their life at the level of our conviction. Just words without conviction have no power, and conviction without words will never stir up latent energy, will never fulfill its own promise. He goes on to say, we are held accountable for the very words which we speak. We are held accountable for the very words which we speak. Do you see, in our relationship becomes the crucible, the sacred fire in which our words are purified, in which the power of our word is purified in the process of growing our healthy communication. Relationships are the opportunities for deeper spiritual practice, and spiritual practice creates healthy relationships. Right? They go hand in hand. So I can't recommend this book to you enough. I really invite you this week to just notice. Awareness is 50%. Just notice when and how we communicate. You communicate with your most loved one and see where that spiritual practice is available. Let us pray. So just taking a moment to turn within, we just take this opportunity to be grateful that we know the truth of who we are, that there is one infinite power and presence. It is the life that I live, and it is the life that lives through my most intimate relationships, my partnership, my friends, my family, those that are most close to me. This is true for each and every one of us. So let us take this moment right here to see our loved ones with love. To see all the ways that they grow us. That yes, by being in these relationships and by seeking to engage in them in spiritual practice, we are changed for the better. We are changed for the better. And as we continue to grow in our spiritual relationships, we are changed for good. I affirm this for each and every one of us. I declare it to be so. Grateful that it is so, I let it be. And so it is.